Hello, genealogist. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. I promised the members of the Writers' SIG last month that I would put up my talk on organizing for writing success, since I couldn't find the one that I gave to them years ago. So I made some adjustments, and this is the second in a series of writing podcasts, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what I'm supposed to call it. There is a previous one which talks about preparing to write, which talks about environment and those kind of things, which I will put in the links in the description so that you can get to it. You might want to listen to that one first before you listen to this one, but that's okay. This one on organizing for writing success will be followed next week or soon thereafter with one called Avoiding Distractions. So that will be a 1, 2, 3. And then down the line, I will do one on dealing with procrastination. And we'll take it from there. I just don't know when that one's going to happen. So let's get started. By the way, we do have some sponsorships. Goldie May, which I'm still learning how to use. What I've learned so far, I like. If you're interested in Goldie May, you'll find a link in the description. Every day of my life, I now drink LMNT. It's sodium, potassium, and magnesium. It makes my day so much better, and it helps me to focus. You can use the link that's also in the description for that. If you'd like to further support Just Genealogy, there are links to various things also in the description. However, those are not sponsored events. I really do like Goldie May, and I really do like LMNT. The other thing that I'm doing that I haven't figured out how to get a sponsorship for is every day, once or twice a day, I take AG1. So I get my prebiotics, probiotics, and that kind of stuff. Now, you might think, now, what does a genealogist care about all those things? Well, first of all, a genealogist cares about the tools they use and the tools that make their job easier, especially tools that will identify issues. And Goldie May seems to identify issues for me very well. LMNT, one of the important things you need to do as a writer and as a genealogist is focus. And I find that these things, along with other supplements that I take, help me to focus, increase my cognition. After all, I am 72 years old. I was going to quit. I'm not quitting. You will have to put up with me for a very, very, very long time, I hope. So my life has returned to normal. You've seen me in Richmond taking care of my father. He's now in an assisted living facility. So I'm now back in the warehouse, Heritage Books warehouse, and back in my office. So I'm not far removed from my copy of Revolutionary War Bounty Land or my copy of Nettie Schreiner Yanis. Where is it? Nettie Schreiner Yanis's 1787 tax list. I have missed my books, and I'm so glad to be back with my books again. Of course, I'm getting ready to miss them some more. So let's start. So today we're going to talk about organizing for writing success. This is a talk that I gave to the APG Writer SIG a while back. I've given it probably one other time, recently, in fact. But today we're going to discuss methods for planning and organizing, not actually writing. And there is no one solution that fits all of us. You're going to have to find your own unique solution for you. You're going to have to find out what works for you. And only you can determine whether something will work for you or not. You're probably going to have to test some things out. And then there's the issue of sometimes you can do something and then sometimes you just can't. Although my daughter tells me that can't is not my vocabulary, you just may have to work at it a little harder. But the joy of it all is writing. But you have to remember that bad habits make time your enemy and good habits make time your ally. The biggest problem that I have writing is finding the time to be able to do it. And I found that setting aside 2 hours every day doesn't work. Setting aside, I just have to get into the mood to write, but everything is always conflicting. And the distractions talk will deal with that. But James Clear has a book called Atomic Habits, and it's available on Amazon. And I have found it to be most helpful in dealing with trying to create habits that are useful to me in getting things done. You have to recognize that writing is a transformative activity that takes data and turns it into narrative information. And because of the genealogical proof standard, we have to write, because the final stage of the final step in the genealogical proof standard is actually writing. If you don't write it down, it does not count. That's all I can say to that. You have to learn to write. If you're going to be a genealogist, if you're just a hatch, match, and dispatch person doing genealogy, may not think it's important. But I have found that the clarity comes with writing. So I may very well do a report on an ancestor of mine just to put it all together. Now, effective writing is good ideas that are expressed well and arranged in proper order. And somewhere somebody told me, I think it was Tom Jones, but I'm not really sure of that, that you write until there's nothing else you can take out. And so effective writing, again, is good ideas that are expressed well and arranged in the proper order that people can understand. If they can't understand your writing, you're going to have a problem. And recognize that many of us who are specialists in specific areas sometimes think that everybody else knows what we know. And we lose sight of the fact that they don't understand a word we're talking about because they have not been exposed to it before, or because they just don't understand it yet. But that will come in time. Recognize that everything you do has to support your writing, because after all, as a genealogist, writing is the end product of everything we do. Now, there is the Pareto principle that says that 80% of all outcomes, other words for that in this context, are ink on paper, result from 20% of all causes, meaning the things that you bring together, aka productive writing, for any given result. So you want to identify those activities that are the most productive and make them a priority. You have to determine pretty much what your writing style is. It's a function of the task, basically, but there are many pieces associated with that task, and the task may vary from writing project to writing project, depending on who the customer is, even if the customer is only you. So my process is to propose. Lots of people will send me chapters of books. I don't care. I want to see the final work. But propose is, for example, a lecture. Well, I have a process that allows me to go from lecture to handout to article to book. And I've done that many times. So I propose, especially something that I don't know much about, because I have to learn more. Learning, constant learner here. You should be a constant learner too. So recently I did a talk for the North Carolina Society on indentured servants in North Carolina. That resulted in me doing a talk on indentured servants in the Mid-Atlantic for Legacy Family Tree, which you can get to through the description. And that has resulted to the planning stages for an article for the NGS magazine on indentured servants. So right now I'm planning for an article on indentured servants in the NGS magazine, and I have the background for it because I've lectured on it at least twice, actually more than that. And I have 2 different handouts. So I already have the outline for writing, that kind of thing. And I can, as I go along, create or polish my competency. So in the beginning, I was creating competency because I honestly didn't know anything about indentured servants, except they existed. And I didn't realize how many there actually were in colonial America. And then I'll continue to polish my competency as the article is written. I am constantly thinking about it among the other things that I'm thinking about. But there will come a time when I have to create focus and I actually have to write it. And I need to make that process easy. I need to create a structure. I need to have a style sheet. I need to know who I'm writing for. I need to know what their style sheet is. How do they do footnotes? How do they, or do they do endnotes? Or are they internal to the document? And then I have to organize my input. And then I have to create a draft. I don't revise my draft until I'm done. Now, I may make side notes somewhere else, but draft creation, that's a flowing process. It happens all at once. And then once I have the draft, I'll revise and edit it until I have a completed work. As part of the proposal side, I have to ask the question, what do you want me to do? Or what do you want me to do next? Every time I finish a project, I ask, what do you want me to do next? Anytime somebody finishes a book with me, I ask them, what are you going to do next? Writing keeps you alive. Writing keeps you invigorated. Writing keeps you working. And then there also is the issue sometimes of where should I propose? I generally respond to almost every request for a proposal that I get, as long as I don't have an already existing conflict. And I always, when I propose, if I'm, say, I have 9, 7, 5, 4, I always try to select one thing that I honestly don't know anything about yet. And that's how I'm able to learn and be a constant learner, because I have to prove my competency in order to create the talk. So then I have to plan. Once I know what I'm supposed to do, I have to plan for it. When is it due? When's the proposal due? When's the final product due? What style will it be in? What form? What are the deliverables? Will there be a style sheet? I believe in style sheets. Are there any internal constraints or external constraints? And is it going to be peer reviewed? I always want things to be peer reviewed. If it's not going to be peer reviewed, then I'm going to want somebody else to look at it for me, especially if it's a book. So one of the things I do as part of the post-planning process is do a self-assessment of my competency. What pieces am I missing? Now, part of the problem is sometimes you don't know what you're missing until you're halfway into the project. Sometimes you don't realize that there is something missing. So you need to recognize that this is flowing, that is somewhat free form with some structure, and that you may have to create a competency plan. Now, do I write my competency plan out? No. Some people should. I don't. I just recognize that I have to become competent in some component of what it is I want to present. And then I need to make sure that I have time to actually do that, because I don't want to be caught short when it comes time to actually do the writing. Because I tend to do my writing using the energy of procrastination to get it done because I have a deadline. I'm not a procrastinator. I don't get things done ahead of time, other than the planning and creating or polishing competency. How did the editor or you frame the assignment? Again, how competent am I? Is there material that will help me? Will I be able to use it again in the future? And that last one is very important to me, because recognize my process is lecture, create a handout. That handout will be an outline for an article. A set of articles will end up becoming a book. And that, as I said, I've used that process before. So you want to take down a moment and write down a few notes about what you want to write about. I just do that on scrap paper because it's just that. It's just a few comments. And that scrap paper sits on my desk for a while. I've just purchased Scrivener again. I had it on my phone for some reason. Now I've got it on my laptop. So I may integrate Scrivener into dealing with this concept of where those notes will reside, so that I don't lose that piece of paper, because I have the habit of losing pieces of paper. Now, in the process of idea formation, I always have to be sure that I'm focused on what is the purpose of all this, so I don't go off on tangents. I always like to sit down once I've done these notes and basically write out, what questions do I want to have answered? What things need to be answered? And sometimes what I will do, not all the time, but sometimes what I will do is I will then take that question and then write to that question. And that sometimes makes things a little bit easier to create the original draft, because sometimes it will just be a function of cut and paste, flow, and then edit and revise. I need to be sure that I know what the most important points are that should exist in the final product. What do I want to get across? And then are there some minor points that I want to get across also? As part of this process, a part of the planning process, I'm looking for graphics that will help me. Magazine editors love to have graphics, want to have illustrations, want to have pictures because they make it a magazine. So as I'm in this planning process, I'm also looking for compiled military service record abstracts, for example, Revolutionary War pension abstracts, War of 1812 abstracts, those kinds of things that will help me. Book covers generally will help me also, although not so much for a written work so much as they will help me in my lecture, but the books will get me to more information. So my idea formation could be a blank sheet of paper that eventually will turn into a folder on my desktop, and I just will throw things in it over time. And then eventually I will create a PowerPoint of storyboards. And again, I just make that flow. I throw all of those things that are in that folder in some semblance of order, but not necessarily the order, and create a PowerPoint full of all those pieces, whether they be written, whether they be images, all kinds of things. And I create a PowerPoint of storyboards. Now that may change as I become more and more familiar with Scrivener, but currently this is my process. As time gets closer and more things get put into either folder or the storyboard, it begins to fill up. So I may have 10, I may have 50 items in the folder or the storyboard before I actually start to put it in some sort of order. And long-term thinking has a lot to do with that order, because I've been cogitating on how it should flow. And in the folders, it doesn't necessarily flow, although I may use file names to order them just a little bit. But generally, I should say very rarely, does the end product match the order in which things are put into the storyboards. Now, recognize that writing will change you. And over time, the quality of your writing will also change. And that's supposed to happen. And as a writer, you need to do more than just understand the material you're writing about. I believe that I have to understand the material that I can stand up in front of you and answer any question that you might have. And if you know me personally, you know the concept in my life of Stump Craig. So I have to be able to answer any question that anyone might ask me about the material that I'm dealing with. And that's where my level of comfort comes from. If I'm competent enough to believe that I can, in fact, answer any question that deals with a subject, then I'm ready to go. Recognize that you're going to deal with concepts of reflection, analysis, critique, connections to other material, and you're going to draw conclusions as you go. And don't forget that there are going to be tangents. Serendipity plays a role in my life. I've created a couple of books because I was working on another book and found something more interesting. So I finished that before I went back to the other book, that kind of thing. You will always need to find new ways to think about the material. This is what makes you competent. New ways to think about the material will also make you an expert in the material. New ways and unique ways will make you different than anybody else in the marketplace, and that also is important. So your goal is to ensure that it's clear to everyone reading that you're the go-to person on the subject, because that will result in people coming to you and asking you to lecture again. That will result in people coming to you and say, we would like you to write an article about. That will result in you having a sense of competency enough to be able to write a book. So you want to ensure that your approach is not vague. You want to be very specific. Vagueness creates a concept of fluff in your reader and in your lecture. I don't know how many times I've listened to people and recognized they've only dealt with the tip of the iceberg. They haven't gone deep. They haven't done the deep dive into the subject that's necessary to be competent. They've only given you a taste. If you're only giving somebody a taste, that's not enough, because otherwise you'll get a reputation for being fluffy. So you want to look for detail that they couldn't find, the reader couldn't find, unless they really had to hunt for it. And that's Many times I live in a world where somebody will respond to me because of an article and they will say, I didn't know that. Thank you so much. Now I know. Now I can move. And the same thing with books and the same thing with lectures. Now, you should recognize that in my head, lectures are writing also because there's a handout. So I have this continuum of, and I will continue to attempt to beat it into your brains of lecture, handout, article, book. So you want to create focus. So you need to create focus. You want to write to persuade, and you want to write to inquire. You want people to do things. You want people to act as a function of what you're writing. You want to address the issue. If this was all testable, what would the test be? Because that will help you write it. So it may be that you have pre-writing strategies. You may create a list. You may do clustering, such as mind mapping, idea mapping, free writing, looping. I honestly don't do any of those things. A listing, maybe, pre-writing strategy, maybe, like on a piece of paper. Mind mapping, I've done that before. It's, in my mind, it's just too much work. Now, in a complex project, that and idea mapping might work for me. Free writing and looping sometimes, but not usually. So you want to create structure. Now, recognize that that structure is a function of the output. It could be a list. It could be narrative. It could be a family history, which means that you're going to have to use the appropriate numbering system. So you have to decide who it's being written for, which numbering system do they want? Is it NGSQ? Is it register? Those are the only two that really count. Recognize that you should create a style sheet. I promise you that in a long-term writing project, not having a style sheet will mean that halfway through the project, you'll all of a sudden decide to change the style, and then you'll have to revamp everything. So you want to make sure that the style sheet you start with is the style sheet that you're willing to end with. So what's your approach going to be? Is it going to be case study? This is something that I've started doing more and more. I didn't used to do case studies. I used to just do shock and awe records. Now I try to do case studies for everything. So I've created Revolutionary War, 1812, colonial ancestor. I've created those kinds of case studies in the past couple of years. And I'm going to continue to figure out ways to convert things into case studies, because then once I have this case study, I can then write in depth about the results of the case study. And that ends up as an article, that ends up as a book. You could be using a comparison approach, a descriptive approach, an evaluative approach, an exploratory approach, an interpretive approach, and a narrative approach. Those are all possibilities. I usually will use a descriptive approach. I very rarely use exploratory or interpretive. And I'm just not a narrative kind of guy. I work on it, but most of the books that I've written are lists. People complain all the time, Craig, all you do is write lists. Well, the lists are useful. So you want to organize your input. What method are you going to use? Some people use 3x5 cards with questions on them. Some people create a storyboard. Some people use outlines. Me, I use a handout. Now recognize that a handout is an outline and your PowerPoints are your storyboard. So it all comes together. So it may be that it's pieces of all these things. So you want to pull together the various scans, references, all that kind of stuff, and then begin to put them in some order of presentation. Now, there are three kinds of presentation methods. They could be chronological, they could be spatial, or they could be in order of importance. I don't care. Usually, if it's a family history, it's going to be in some sort of chronological order. Normally, if it's some records analysis discussion, it's going to be in order of what the most important records you can deal with are. And you want to put them on the front and you want to put them in the back, so that, because that's what people remember. They remember the front and they remember the back, and in the middle it gets muddled. You have to understand the nature of distractions. They are external and they're internal. I'm not going to spend much time on them today because the next session, the third session, is going to deal with avoiding distractions in detail. But you have to recognize that there are external distractions that deal with environmental noise. There are technological distractions like emails and notifications and all those kind of things, texts, and there are interruptions by people and animals. And I don't have cats because I don't want them walking across my keyboard. There are internal distractions. There may be mental clutter. You may suffer from procrastination. I don't suffer from procrastination. I use it, and that'll be the fourth talk. There is the concept for some people of perfectionism. I don't suffer from that. It gets to the point where it's done, and I'm not going to hone it anymore. And again, I use that concept of, is there anything else I can remove? And that lets me know that I'm in the right place. And there is also hunger. So I make sure that I'm not hungry when I'm writing. I may have water, I may have coffee, I may have LMNT, don't have sugary drinks, I don't have soda, unless it's a stevia or some sort of non-sweet beverage. Try to make it savory if you can, so that coffee doesn't have cream or sugar or anything like that in it. Just the pure caffeine. I am an intermittent faster, and I find that by being an intermittent faster, I have better clarity. So water fasting improves my writing and my clarity. I am best after a 36-hour fast. So if I've got a 36-hour fast and I've got a priority, I'm good to go. If you are not a faster, recognize that you can't just do a 36-hour fast. You need to start slow at 12, 14, 16 and work your way into it, and spend a couple of weeks at each break until you get to the point and where you can gradually increase your time of fasting. And then you suffer from calorie restriction, and then you'll also lose weight, and there won't be as much fat wandering through your bloodstream, which will be good for your brain also. Recognize that understanding these distractions is the first step towards combating them effectively. And then you're going to write. You're going to create a draft. As I've said before, do not revise it until you're done. Then, once you're done, revise and edit, and then write some more. I hope you had as much fun as me doing this. If you've got questions, please put them in the chat. You know my email, and you know this is just genealogy. I look forward to hearing your comments, and I look forward to providing you with the next phase, avoiding distractions, at some time in the near future. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.